Hi, this is Stephen, and this is Astro Indicator Update, Excursions into Practical Astrology, and this is episode 36. So what are we going to do today? Well, today I'm going to look at sort of this issue of possible potential inflation increasing in the U.S. economy. And so we're going to be more looking at the macro level from an astrological perspective and from a technical perspective, looking at some of the markets. So this is somewhat speculative, but I'm just going to share with you some of my research in looking at past events of hyperinflation and seeing if there's any correlation with the astrology in those events to what we're looking at today in the U.S. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at comparing what happened to Germany back in the early 20s to the USA currently. And I forgot to mention, today is April 26th, and so this was called, the Republic of Germany at that time was called the Weimar Republic, and it lasted for approximately 10 years. This was after World War I, and Germany lost that war, and the other countries in Europe forced Germany to make payments to them because of the war. And Germany went into a very severe depression. And starting in about 1922, they attempted to remedy some of their economic problems by printing much more of their currency. And we'll look at what happened in the next chart, and I'll also look at the astrology of that. Then we'll get into the markets like I usually do, looking at the New York Stock Exchange, gold. I'm going to add a couple charts related to the gold stocks just for your consideration. Okay, this is Weimar, Germany. This is the value of one gold mark relative to their paper currency. And you can see that it was slowly rising from 1918 up until 1922, and then it just took billions of dollars to equal one gold mark, even in quadrillions, I think. If you do some research on it, you'll see people, carrying money around in wheelbarrows to buy a loaf of bread. The hyperinflation was so severe. So I'm going to be concentrating on the astrology of 1922, 1923, and just making some comments about some similarities that I see between the astrology in Germany at that time and the astrology that we see in the U.S. over the next 2 years. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is that many economists, analysts in the economic realm are concerned about hyperinflation, or at least increased inflation occurring in the U.S. But their ability, and again, what I'm going to be doing is speculative, but it's very unclear if and when that might occur. And some people say it's highly likely within the next 5 years or 10 years or whatever. It's just evident that kind of getting clarity on this issue is difficult for many people. So let's look at the astrology here. So I have a chart here for Germany, and I'm using the 1871 date, January 1st, 1871 date for this chart of the German state. I don't have a time for it exactly, so when that happens, you usually just put, actually, in my research, this was supposedly the accurate time, was little after midnight, 12:01. I take that back. And so who knows, this could be the ascendant, the Libra ascendant, but nevertheless, there's things going on in this chart aside from the ascendant that are quite fascinating to me. excuse me. So we see in this chart, and this is like the natal chart of Germany, like I've used in the USA in the past, this inner ring. And in the outer ring, I have 1922, what was going on at that time. So Capricorn Sun, 10 degrees. You can see it down here. And what was occurring by transit at that time was that there was an opposition to a transiting Pluto taking place. Very strong Pluto energy period, a sense of crisis, sense of oppression. Things were at a critical stage where just survival was a major issue. So what else was going on? Well, not only was that going on, but we had Pluto squaring Jupiter in the sky, and Jupiter was squaring the Sun. So we had a T-square to Jupiter, possibly on the ascendant in 1922. A lot of Jupiter, a lot of Pluto was affecting the country as a whole. Now, normally, if you have any background in astrology, you would think that Jupiter is always a beneficial energy, and I would say normally it is. However, on occasions, Jupiter simply manifests and expresses itself as expanding and enlarging, increasing whatever it happens to be going on, and that can be at times a negative, can be increasing kind of making things more debilitating or whatever. In this case, it does sort of match up with a crisis and the expansion of the money supply. This is how I'm seeing it in this case. So this was what was going on in 1922, just as their hyperinflation started to rise. And then in 1923, it just, took off, as you saw in the previous chart. We have Saturn transiting in the 12th house right here. Saturn at that time was squaring its own position. I'm not going to draw it in because you can see it right here. So Saturn was in the mix as well. So let's look at what happened the following year and see how the transits change. So here we're looking at the same chart, but 1923, okay? The Pluto transit has not changed. Pluto is still opposite the Sun because it moves so slow. But what we have here is that Saturn has moved on, and now we have even sort of a heavier, more depressing situation with a T-square taking place to Saturn, the transiting Saturn. Jupiter has moved on into the second house, and so that expansionary energy has moved into the area of often associated with money. Okay. So this whole hyperinflationary thing even got worse in 1923. So this was a huge challenge to everyone in that society, and it resulted in increased. They were in such dire straits that they were looking for a solution anywhere, and this is when Hitler started to grow in his popularity. This is when he wrote Mein Kampf, and it took a number of years, but by 1933 that he came to power. But it was out of this disaster that they were looking for solutions, and he, his propaganda or whatever you want to call it, appeared to be one, at least to many Germans at the time. But they were desperate. Let's just leave it that way. Leave it at that. So let's see. So I wanted to point that out, that we had, a very heightened Pluto energy, Jupiter and Saturn going on relative to the Sun for the most part in Germany's chart at that time. And in my estimation, those energies could very well have been reflecting the economy, what was going on in the economy than the hyperinflation. So here, back to the U.S. chart. Here we have the U.S. chart in the middle, and we are up to date. This is yesterday, April 25th. We are continuing with a Pluto opposition to our Mercury. We have been in basically a Pluto period because back in, I think it was 2014-15, Pluto was opposite our sun, just like it was with Germany in 1922. Over the last year, we have had, the Fed attempted to reduce their balance sheet. And this was in the fall of 2018. And the stock market took a big dive, and they decided that was not going to work out so well. And so they started cutting interest rates again. So this expansionary policy of cutting interest rates or of printing more money, I see as being sort of a Jupiter symbol, being symbolized by Jupiter. And that has been, sort of increasing drastically recently with the pandemic to help prop up everything. Again, Jupiter has an element, a few weeks ago, I made a video saying, as Jupiter caught up with Pluto, possibly the tide was going to turn with a pandemic, and we could potentially, with the next week or so, start seeing better news come out. And my estimation, we have seen better news come out with, fewer people contracting the illness and fewer deaths and so forth. However, we have the money printing going on in the background. We have these two energies very strongly affecting the country as a whole. In addition, they will, in a way, continue over the next year and a half. And this is my major point, is that if I was going to have to, if I was sort of forced to say, when might the U.S. experience more noticeably higher inflation in our economy? In looking at the astrology, I would, in comparing it to other, hyperinflationary events, I would say it would be within the next year and a half. So let's see why I'm arriving at that. So we have, actually, Pluto is now going retrograde. It's going to come back and be exact, hitting Mercury here fairly shortly. Jupiter in a couple months is going to go retrograde, come back and hit Mercury. And even though the virus situation may continue to get better, I think we're still facing major issues in the economy and in other areas. I mean, Pluto deals could symbolize, have a lot to do with the deep state, with the shadow government, with a lot of, things going on behind the scenes that may start, the reality of that existence may start surfacing more and more over the next year. And hopefully those things will be purged in some fashion. Even on an individual level, things like that happen in a strong Pluto situation. Oftentimes the crisis is worse at the beginning, but then there's a healing that goes on, and I could see that happening. But we still may have to deal with the repercussions of what's gone on with the central bank's creation of so much money and it filtering into the system. And so my major point here is that I see the same symbols showing up in the U.S. as I've seen in other events in the past. So I'm going to look at what happens. So this is happening in the second house, dealing with money in the economy. Saturn is going to go retrograde here shortly, come back and conjunct Pluto, which is just a very sort of heavy, depressive energy. And let's look at what goes on next year. So this is now. So let's go 1 year ahead. Get rid of my blue line. Let's see, why aren't we getting rid of that? There we go. So what happens in a year? Well, Pluto moves slow. However, Pluto has moved on, and now it's going to be conjunct its own natal position. Okay, here we go. And so I think on one level, we're still dealing with this really crisis, dark energy in some fashion. Okay? In addition, I hate to say this, in addition, Saturn has moved from 0 degrees Aquarius to 13 degrees Aquarius, but in a year, it's going to be in a 150-degree aspect with our Sun. So it is also in the mix. Jupiter's moved on. A year from now, it will be in the 3rd house, and it will probably be going back and forth over our moon. This is open to interpretation. This could be really and truly, this could, indicate some optimism and some degree of confidence in things getting better on some level. However, that two-edged sword of Jupiter, where there's, some percentage of it only really manifests as something increasing, something expanding, and not necessarily things getting better. And so it's unpredictable. However, my major point here is that these three energies are still strong in the U.S. over the next year, year and a half, and they are still challenging our economy, and they could manifest as some degree of an increase in, the inflation rate. Now, if that's the case, we may also see it being having an effect on the gold market, because normally that's where people tend to put their money when inflation really starts getting in gear. And I think the gold market, I'm going to say it right now, I'll come to it later, but I think the gold market is particularly strong over the next year and a half as well, which may be a supportive factor in my sort of thesis that I'm presenting. So anyway, let's move on. Let's look at some charts. I just wanted to throw that out. Okay, here's the Dow Jones Industrials. We've bounced. We're back around the 50% retracement level, possibly a little bit above that. We have broken through this broken out and down from this, this wedge formation. We may be doing a back test, what's called a back test. I don't have it in here, but the volume has been decreasing a little. Breadth has been decreasing a little. We have not gone above the 50-day moving average. From a technical standpoint, again, hopefully you've watched one of my videos, because all these vertical lines deal with the astrology of this particular market. Everything else on here, the horizontal lines, the indicators down here, are common, conventional, technical indicators, okay? And I combine the both. And so when I see, something approaching one of these vertical lines, I know what the astrology is, and I know that I try to then combine that with the technicals that I see. Now, what's happening here is that we don't have a lot of astrology until we get way out until like May 8th, okay? Let me look at my notes again. Hold on. Yeah, and so the 8th is really like a Friday, okay? And there is not a lot of bullish energy supporting this market until then. However, and this is a big qualifier, we have a Fed meeting coming up, I think this week on Tuesday and Wednesday. There's a lot of political, investment in keeping this market up for political reasons. They're going to do whatever they can. And the whole issue is if just things look so horribly from the economic side of things, will that override and overpower the insiders' attempt to keep this market up? Well, from an astrological perspective, from now until May 8th, there's not a lot supporting this market, okay? So my bias is to the downside, but we'll just have to see. You want to play the technicals. We could get a pop higher. In the longer term, I think we're coming down. This may have just been a back test. So it's really hard to say. I'm just going to share with you the astrology right now does not support this market staying up over the next week. Let's leave it at that, okay? Okay, we have somewhat similar things going on here with gold. We have this wider wedge formation. The vertical lines, again, deal with the astrology specifically to the gold market. Now, I don't try to, indicate on the chart the various degrees of differences between these vertical lines. I normally comment on them in my videos. The interesting thing with the gold market is that the line that you see at the cursor right here, which was on Friday, historically is a very bullish energy for that market, any market actually. However, it has come after a large rally, okay? We're not totally in overbought territory, at least in the RSI down here. We're sort of threatening a crossover in the MACD. And we have a very strong energy on Friday, which hasn't really reflected itself. And so my recommendation here is that because this is taking place after the huge rally, it may just reduce itself to being a significant date. And that could be a turning point date. I'm somewhat sorry to say, but there's going to be up and downs in this market. Overall, the astrology of the gold market is quite strong over the next year and a half, okay? But there's going to be pullbacks. There's going to be smashes by the insiders to keep a lid on it. I don't think they'll be successful, but there will be pullbacks. And we may be looking at one because we don't have a lot of astrology out here supporting this. Okay, so I want you to concentrate on the trend lines, particularly this lower trend line. And upcoming, let me look at my notes. Upcoming. Upcoming on April 28th. Okay, this too can be a turning point day and maybe a reversal date, okay, right here. Now I'm going to talk about silver in just a second. After a couple charts, I'm going to get into gold stocks very quickly. Silver may keep things at least, supported, because we do have intermarket dynamics within, related markets, silver and gold and so forth, and the dollar, okay? However, if we don't see some bullishness within the next 2 days, this energy on the 28th could be also indicate a reversal in gold, at least to a certain extent. I would really emphasize this trend line, okay? And if you want to take profits when it moves, if it happens to move down through that trend line, that might be a smart thing to do, because we don't have a lot of astrology out here for a while, okay? So let's move on. I just wanted to emphasize that. Because on a macro level, I'm still bullish on gold. On a macro level, I'm still bullish on silver. I thought actually this chart was further down the line. But this in silver, even though silver has not kept up with gold, and it hasn't even gone through its 50-day moving average, and it's got some real, resistance above it. Out here on, May 5th, if we can get there, actually May 4th, 5th, and 6th, there's just, I didn't draw them all in here. I think I just said May 5th as a sort of a midpoint. There's a lot of energy and normally it's bullish energy in the silver chart. And if it kicks in, it's going to affect the gold chart. And so normally it works in reverse to that. But here, silver has some definite astrological things going on, which may show up. It's a ways away, we're a week and a half away from that. So a lot could happen. We could break down, but mark that on your calendar, and I'll probably have another video before that takes place. So that's coming up. So I wanted to just make kind of another, video is kind of dealing with macro speculation. The gold mining stocks, and this is the junior stocks, this GDXJ, they've had a major rally as well, and they're coming up to some resistance also. Many of those stocks have the same formation if you look at them, kind of a rising channel, okay? Again, these stocks, which I have funds invested in, you have to have some experience in this area because these stocks are quite volatile. They move at 4% on average. I'm just throwing that out there. That's very typical on a daily basis. So, unless you're taking profits, frequently, or at least watching these markets or subscribing to an investment gold trading service that can help you, you need to be careful. Having said that, the macro picture in this area has a lot of headroom. But over the next couple weeks, given what's going on in gold, this trend line and the same similar parallel or trend line that you see in the individual stocks, if you happen to be trading them, is becoming more and more important, okay? Until I think we get above this resistance area, we need to be a little careful and be open to taking some profits. But let's look at the macro level for GDXJ here with a monthly chart, and that's what I've got next. So that individual chart we just looked at was a kind of a zoomed in chart of this area right there. However, when you come back to the highs that gold was making back in 2011, these mining stocks, these junior miners, this index was much, much higher, obviously. So given the macro level, even though I've discussed the ups and downs that may happen, as well, the macro level for some of these stocks is quite large. I mean, 4x, if we're looking at, it's trading at 41 right now. It got up to 160 back in 2011. Am I saying it's going to hit that level? No. But given what the other things that are going on in the economy, the potential for increased inflation, the gold, astrology, and so forth, when we break out of this, I could see, this being, a very attractive area for investment, particularly if you know how to trade. And if you don't know how to trade, then I would recommend learning some technical analysis or subscribing to a service that actually trades in the precious metals. So lastly, quickly, I'm going to talk about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin just went through a period with not a lot of astrology going on, except it just broke out of this wedge formation, which is kind of surprising to me. And on a more, sort of a potential lesson learned note, we're going to compare this chart with the chart of Ethereum, which is the next chart. But we've broken out. We're above the 50-day moving average. This bullishness sort of surprised me. I thought we may have just traded sideways until we get over to May 1st. But when I looked at the chart for Ethereum, I may have an explanation for this. So, potentially this could continue just on a basis of the technicals involved, because normally when you break out of this pattern, you may get what's called a back test, where it drops down a little bit and then it goes higher, okay? Because we don't have a lot of resistance going on up here. So this, really could indeed go higher, even though we're getting a little high in the RSI, but we're not at excessive levels. So let's look at this breakout thing and maybe come up with an explanation, because this bullish green candle right in the middle of my cursor, that happened last Wednesday, which was the 22nd. So let's look at Ethereum. Well, actually, Ethereum had a strong bullish energy date on April 22nd. And so I think this is an example of intermarket dynamics taking place, like you see between gold and silver, or gold and the dollar, and I could name other ones. But I think here, in this instance, rather than following Bitcoin, we had Bitcoin following Ethereum's lead. And so we get a boost of Ethereum, and Bitcoin just kind of followed suit and was able to break through that chart pattern that I just showed you. So anyway, that's it for today, and I probably will be back next week. Again, my name is Stephen. I've been researching financial astrology for 25 years. I have a master's degree in psychology, actually transpersonal psychology. And if you would like to email me, that's my email address. I do accept Bitcoin donations, so you could take a picture of this and remember that. That's my address. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. So possibly I'll be back in a week. So thank you for listening, watching. Bye for now.